Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste to everyone who have gathered for the class, and welcome to the fourth class on Atmabodha. We have been studying self-knowledge, Atmabodha, which is a Vedantic text written by Adi Shankaracharya, and we are following the commentary of Swami Nikhilanandji Maharaj and also the translation given by him. So in the last class, I think we were discussing Upadhi. We were on the 9th verse and we were discussing Upadhi. Today we will be discussing this again, and further on we will move to the next few verses before we take up the Q&A. So the concept of Upadhi, it should be very clear in our mind. Why is this constantly spoken about in Vedanta? Upasamipe sthitva sviyan gunan anyatra adadati iti upadhi, which means upadhi is something which stays near one particular thing but tends to transfer its properties to another, tends to color the thing it stays near. The classical example given in Vedanta is that of, space enclosed within a cup. The space naturally gets limited. You can even say air enclosed in a cup is limited. Air is spread out all over, but when you place a cup, the air in the cup gets limited. So the cup is the upadhi. But we must study it, applying it to our own system. How does upadhi work on our system? Upadhi verily changes the nature of man. So that is why this is something we really have to observe what upadhi is about. For example, your persona, it is strengthened by upadhis, and your persona feeds on upadhis. So upadhis go to strengthen our persona, and the persona itself feeds on upadhis. See, we take our personalities very seriously, isn't it? And what are they composed of? They are composed primarily of upadhis. Our sense of ourself, which we call our persona, our personality, that is primarily composed of upadhis. Please check and see if this is true or not. The actual meaning of the word persona was mask. A persona means a mask. It's an ancient Greek word, because the Greek actors of ancient times, they did not have all those elaborate costumes, and they had to act wearing masks of that particular role which they were supposed to play. For example, if an actor was supposed to play the role of a king, the Greek actor would hold the mask of a king in front of him and speak through that mask. So, and then when he took up the role of the queen, because in those days women were not allowed on stage, so when he had to play the role of a queen, he would take the queen's mask and put it in front of his face. And when the role was over, he would put the mask down and then maybe resume another role, or he would just be himself. So this was called persona, the mask. But our problem is, our masks, our persona, we can't put it down. We can't put it aside. They actually stick to our faces. So this has become so because of the fact of adhyas. We are superimposing our apparent personality upon our real self. Check and see, right now it is happening. What we consider ourselves to be, it cannot be anything changing. And everything about our persona is changing. The body changes, the mind changes even more. Your thoughts keep changing, your emotions are changing, your will is not unidirectional, it will keep changing directions. So what is permanent about our persona? Hardly anything. So it's nothing but a mask, but we give it the status of reality. In fact, for most people, they are their personality. They are verily the mask they are wearing. So this happens because of the lack of Vedantic thought and investigation. Our ability to understand ourselves as we truly are is discounted. We assume ourselves to be a whole lot of things, and we are functioning through so many masks. But the mask has become me. The mask is verily identified with my own being. So this is what adhyas does. And the noose of adhyas, you can say, the noose of Maya are these upadhis which we collect. You see, a simple car which you own can become a symbol of your status. It's a status symbol. The homes we live in, they are symbols of our status. The names we have, whatever we do, whatever we possess, all of them become part of our being, as it were, part of our personality. And we invest so much of attention on them. This is the reason why we do it. That defines me. But if you investigate this concept and see, to what extent does it define me? How can I be defined by matter? How can an object define who I am? But we manage to do it. You know, even here we joke and say, even the dress which people wear, many times they are so identified with it. It's like a Shashtam Kosh. 5 koshas are not enough. There's a 6th kosh. Your entire textile and fashion designing industry, it thrives on this adhyas, that you feel your clothing, it defines you. So the essential thing about upadhi, what we need to understand is, you must know that it is something which is strengthening my persona, but my persona is not me. So I wear a mask, okay, but I'm able to put aside that mask whenever required. I'm not identified with my masks. This sense will come into us only when we taste a little bit of who we truly are. Then we will not care to identify with our masks, isn't it? If the actor did not have an idea of himself as he is, he would be very happy being the actor that he was playing. He would be happy to identify with his role. But just like how he knows in the depths of his heart who he truly is, we also should seek to know who we truly are. And then you can, of course, in the transactional world, you wear any persona and then you can put it aside when it is not required. We play different roles and that's fine. But if your mask sticks to you, your real being, then that can be a real problem, isn't it? Because the mask will keep changing and then my being also changes. So this thing has to be very clear. It is possible to keep our upadhis aside and the adhyas aside only when I'm able to detect the real I. Only when I'm able to establish myself in my true being. At least I sincerely doubt the apparent nature of my personality. I doubt what I'm imposing upon myself. And this is what Vedanta naturally does for you when you primarily ask the question, who am I? And when you primarily see that this body-mind is objective to my being, these are objects for my study, for my perception, then naturally I am not going to identify 100% with them. I create a distance between me and the body. I create a distance between me and my mind. Now this itself is enough to shake away your upadhis. This itself naturally turns the table on the upadhis because it shows them their place. In the transactional world, yes, you need to have an identity to work with, but it must have its place. That doesn't actually define my being. So just Vedantic thought, Vedantic investigation gives you this capacity to put aside what you are not and identify yourself with what you truly are. But if this doubt has not arisen within us, who am I truly? Then we will be very happy to identify with our upadhis, isn't it? So this is something which we have to observe closely. To what extent does matter and the material and the positions I have collected around me, to what extent do they affect me? To what extent do I define myself through them? And to a certain extent, we must learn to keep distance from all of these upadhis. Finally, Shankaracharya is going to tell you everything about your personality also is an upadhi imposed upon you. Not just the things you have, but even this gross body, the mind, all of these are upadhis imposed upon the self. So this is a very deep level of investigation which he is going to go into. Before we go into that, let me give you some more ideas upon upadhi so that the concept remains very clear in our mind. See, Sri Ramakrishna very jokingly said a number of things about upadhi, which are very interesting. Here I would like to request all of you to please read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna every day. At least one page. At least a little bit every day, because just like how the Vedanta is the essence of the Vedas, the essence of this Vedant is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. You will find there the perception of a man of the highest realization. How he sees this world. How he sees reality as it is. And how he sees Brahman manifested in this universe. The subject matter of the Upanishads which we are discussing, you will find it wonderfully demonstrated in this great life, the life of the great master, Sri Ramakrishna. So if you read his gospel, the utterances which came out from that very elevated state of mind, which was so constantly in samadhi, just if you observe those utterances, at once it sends a thrill through you, because he's throwing very deep insight on what we are studying. And that's why I'm going to draw a number of examples right from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So I would request you to at least go through one page of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna every day. You can take this as homework, because you will see how much it will help you in this particular study. Sri Ramakrishna says, upadhis, they change a man's nature itself, as it were. Then he gives a funny example. He says, you give a man a paper and a pen. At once he will start scribbling something. That is the power of the pen. The pen is the upadhi there. Then further on he says, you see, even if a sick man wears high boots, at once he will start climbing steps, jumping up steps, as it were, like an Englishman, going very fast, although he's sick. That's the power of the boot. So upadhis do all this for us naturally. In a way, they affect our persona in a deep way. And then Sri Ramakrishna also used to say, money is a great upadhi. Once I was going to Konnagar. Sri Ramakrishna says this in the gospel. Once I was going to, Konnagar is a place in Bengal. I was going there along with Hriday. And we went by boat and we came back by boat. And there used to be a Brahmin who used to constantly visit the temple Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. So as I was coming back by boat, I saw this Brahmin sitting on the river bank. As soon as I stepped down from the boat, he greeted me. But how did he greet me? He said, "Oh, priest, hello, how are you? How do you do?" So the very tone of his greeting, that itself told me that this man has somehow got some money. So due to that, he has developed a disposition which is of this kind. It's not very respectful. Maybe it's not the usual respect which he used to show Sri Ramakrishna. He's just bluntly saying, "How are you? How do you do?" So Sri Ramakrishna concluded. He whispered to Hriday, "See, this man must have got some money, because it is quite possible, this does not apply to all, but it is quite possible that money as an upadhi changes the nature of man." Isn't it? That is why all these are upadhis. They are sort of impositions upon ourself, and they work on our persona. Then Sri Ramakrishna makes a very beautiful statement when he is explaining these upadhis. You see, he says, the jiva is nothing but the embodiment of Satchidananda, but since Maya or ego has created various upadhis, he has forgotten his real self. This is our position. And then he says, But one can get rid of the ego after the attainment of knowledge. On attaining knowledge, one goes into samadhi and the ego disappears, but it is very difficult to obtain such knowledge. So everything has been put into a nutshell. Through knowledge, one can overcome this ignorance, our deep identification with all that we are not. It can be overcome through knowledge. But what kind of knowledge is this? This is not knowledge of another object. This is knowledge of our own pure being, that unchanging consciousness which we truly are. It is knowledge of that. Now, that is at the source of your very perceptive process. So how will you know it? You know it by becoming it, by being. It's a kind of communion with pure awareness. That is why the power of meditation is required in order to arrive at this knowledge. Because it is about being and becoming. And meditation itself will show you how to enter the state of pure being, pure awareness, consciousness, what we say, the Atman. It itself will show us. But if the meditative mind is not there, just by rational thinking or logical thinking, we will not arrive at it. So it is important to take up a practice, and it will help us understand what we should place where, what place an upadhi has in our life. Accordingly, I use it. I don't allow it to stick to my face. I don't allow it to become part of my being. So if I develop this maturity, I will be able to give things the place they deserve in my life. Otherwise, I'm all mixed up because I have no authentic sense of myself, my true being. I will readily identify with anything on the external front. So this is the knowledge which comes to us through Vedantic inquiry and investigation. This is something which Shankaracharya is further going to dwell upon. You see, in the 9th verse, he also told us that God himself, Brahman himself, appears to be diverse, manifested in all this multiplicity because of the fact of upadhis. Now, isn't this true? This very world which we are seeing is nothing but name and form superimposed on the fact of consciousness. This is how any Vedantin will see the world. You see, check and see any object. We see it as a particular form with a particular name, but it can be reduced to a more primary substratum. Like this, if you go on analyzing anything, you will see that it is a particular, any object is name and form superimposed on a more fundamental substratum. And the most fundamental substratum is consciousness. So verily this world is nothing but object, name, form, upadhi superimposed on Brahman. And so the Lord, as it were, appears divided in his creation. Avibhaktam cha bhuteshu vibhaktam iva cha sthitam, Bhagavad Gita says. The one undivided reality of Brahman appears to be divided in his world of manifestation. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, many a time he is identified with this supreme state of his being, with Brahman, and he is speaking from that standpoint. So he tells us very clearly, this just hits you in the Bhagavad Gita. He says at one point, Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarva Bhutashaya Sthitaha. I am the Atman present in all beings. This is my nature, the Lord is saying. And then he says, at another, in several places, and in fact, he says that all that you see manifested is nothing but a bit of me. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridde sherjuna tishtati, he says. The Lord resides in all beings in their heart as consciousness. So you see, Bhagavad Gita also is considered the essence of the Upanishads. So all of these scriptures are speaking of the same truth in so many different words. This is the perception of a man of knowledge. This is the perception of one who is established in this supreme knowledge, Atmabodha. that he is going to see this fundamental substratum Brahman in all that appears manifold. And he sees the essence that is why of this world. He experiences the essence of this world. See, Vedanta does not stop with just knowing who I truly am. When you know who you truly are, you will see that same thing. It can't even be called thing. You know, Brahman is something which can't be defined with words, can't be spoken about. So what you understand yourself to be in the state of the highest knowledge, you will see that same thing manifested everywhere. This is the second step in Vedanta. So the entire world of manifestation is one essential substance in different names and forms. Automatically, the second step follows the first step. We don't have to make any effort. Essentially, you must find the ultimate reality within yourself. There's a graded path. Once you realize that, you will see the real nature of this entire universe to be the same reality of Brahman, which you are. So, with this understanding, let us proceed to the next verse, which Shankaracharya gives us. He says, Nanopadhi vashad eva jati varna shramadayah atmani aropita toye rasavarnadi bhedavat. Owing to its association with various upadhis, such ideas as caste, color, and position are superimposed on Atman as flavor, color, and so forth on water. See, this is an example he is drawing from our everyday life. You can add a whole lot of things to water. If you add tea leaves to water, what do you get? Tea. You add coffee to water, you get coffee. You add lemon to water, you get lemonade. You add mud to water, you get muddy water. You add Ganga Jal to water, you get Ganges water. Now, all of these are upadhis. Tea, coffee, mud, all these are upadhis. Anything added to the essential substance water will produce a different effect. So, upadhi is like this. On the human plane, it is this upadhi that produces caste, color, and position. All our identities, which we hold to be so precious, whether it is our national identity, our social identity, racial identity, are all due to upadhis. Please check and see. Compared to our own true being, pure awareness, these are all upadhis, superimposed entities on us. We identify with them, and so we get an identity. See, the nature of the mind, the mind only keeps on working. Thoughts are unstoppable because of the fact of identity. Check and see this, all that I'm telling you. If you genuinely question your identity and shake away all identities, you will see the mind will stop. It feeds and works on identities. So the way to achieve meditation, one of the ways is you shake away or put a distance between you and your identities. This is a possibility. In fact, many methods of meditation are based on this. If you strongly identify with something, it is almost impossible to stop the mind. It will keep working on that identity. So the way to stop the mind is disidentify yourself from all that you are not, so that you will find who you truly are. Now, how do you disidentify yourself? Just by giving things their place. See, the car you own, it is your car. Definitely it should not be you, isn't it? But when it becomes a very strong status symbol with me, it enters my being, as it were. I am defined by my possessions. So this level of attachment should be cut down, so that I know it is mine, it is not me. Every other object, this applies to every other object in our lives. Anything that you consider mine, anything that you consider to be me, because I have invested so much of energy and time and money on it, analyze it and see. It is mine, definitely. It is for a particular purpose. I will use it, but it should not define me. Not that I get so attached to it, so attracted to it, that it dominates my psychology, my mental process. So if this form of detachment is practiced, you can stop the mind. Meditation becomes possible, because meditation is the art of doing nothing. It's not about doing something. It's about stopping your mind. You stop the mind and see, in a completely conscious state, you will see you remain over. Without any identification, you very, very much remain over. That is why meditation requires training. And this is the natural result of the meditative process, that you as conscious awareness are always there. In that awareness, there is the thought process, what you call the mind, and you are identified with specific thoughts. And so you have built up identities. They do not define you at all, but you assumed that they did. So this whole process can be identified and corrected by Vedantic inquiry, by standing on your true stead, standing on what you truly are. Then you can very well, this is what is called vivek, philosophical discrimination. You can very well put aside what you are not. Use it and keep it aside. When it is not required, it should not dominate your mind. So a little bit of this is practiced, we will understand this whole concept of upadhi, which he is dwelling upon again and again. See, Shankaracharya makes things very clear. He told us in the last verse, Brahman himself, due to upadhis, appears to have become a limited, diverse universe. So it is possible for this to happen, then what to speak of us? In fact, when a man touches this ultimate realization, this is how he is going to perceive this world of manifestation. In Sri Ramakrishna's life, again, let me draw one or two incidents from that life. Once Sri Ramakrishna was standing near a pond, and he saw there, it was a pool actually, and he saw there a number of fishes, large and small, splashing about. He saw them and he said, oh, look, Act Chaitanya, one consciousness in so many bodies, wriggling, manifesting in so many living things. Once Sri Ramakrishna was going to a place called Bardwan from Kamarpukur. And as he was traveling towards Bardwan, he came across a huge meadow on the way. And he also loved vast natural spaces. So he just rushed into that meadow. He wanted to see how living creatures survive and thrive. And when he entered the beautiful vast meadow like a grassland, he saw a line of ants crawling on the ground. At once he said, you see, that same consciousness in all these living creatures. He used to always say, Dap kore maa dekhiye delen. The Divine Mother showed me that it is that same Brahman manifesting through all these creatures. He used to say, I look upon living beings as bubbles in the ocean of Satchidananda. See, all these things which he is describing, they are actually, you can meditate on what he is saying. This is how the man of highest knowledge is perceiving this world. Human beings are nothing but bubbles in the ocean of Satchidananda. I see them as pills made out of that one consciousness, he says at another place. So you see how he is perceiving the universe. So upadhi mukta man, a mind which is free of upadhis, touches its source, and this is the perception it gets. So this is a possibility. In fact, all our sadhana, our spiritual practice will only take you to reality as it is. This is reality as it is. One consciousness manifesting itself in all this multiplicity. But we have a very dominant psychological process, I told you, which is completely untrained. So we are dividing everything in bits and pieces and seeing as much as we want to see, what we want to see, what we want to experience, that much of reality we are seeing. Reality is not like this. Reality is existential in nature, not psychological. And that is why if you want to penetrate into reality as it is required to develop this meditative awareness, enter into the heart of our own being, and then we will see the real nature of this world of manifestation. Before we judge this world and make our conclusions, we must touch the heart of reality. And this is what texts like Atmabodha are telling us again and again, that to a certain extent, remove these upadhis from your mind, and then you see how your mind will work, how your sense of identity works, how you can penetrate into your real being, the pure I. Once you disidentify yourself from the mind and all its doings, the mind gets the ability to turn within and stall itself for a long period of time. So this state is very precious in spiritual life, because this is a state when you are fully conscious but without the thought process. This is when you understand what pure awareness can mean, because you are fully aware in that state but without thought. So these are the moments to be captured, to be able to understand texts like these. So I always recommend meditative practice for Vedantic realization. Without meditation, without this enhanced pure awareness, the experience of it, we will not understand much of Vedanta. So try it on yourself. It's all a do-it-yourself thing. Always I told you, Vedantic research is from the first person, is upon the first person, through the first person, by the first person. And it takes you to the core reality about the first person. So with this, let us now proceed to the next verse. There are a number of technical concepts in this verse, which we will cover one by one. Panchikrita mahabhuta sambhavam karma sanchitam shariram sukha dukkhanam bhogayatanam uchyate. The gross body, the medium through which the soul experiences pleasure and pain, is determined by past action and formed out of the 5 great subtle elements, which become gross when one half portion of one subtle element becomes united with 1/8 of each of the other 4. So now here are a number of concepts for us to understand. We will go into them one by one. First of all, what does Pancha Mahabhut mean? The 5 great elements. They are also called subtle elements. These 5 elements are, they are part of many cultures. Not just that our ancients, the Vedantins, thought like this. In many cultures, the 5 primary elements out of which everything is created, out of which even today you will show me the periodic table and say, these are the primary elements from which everything is created. But something primary even to that, even to those elements which are on your periodic table, are these 5 Pancha Mahabhutas, and they are classified as Akash, space, Vayu, air, Agni, fire, Aap, water, Prithvi, earth. These are the 5 fundamental elements, what are called the subtle elements, out of which everything else is made. This is what they believed in. This is a huge theory. Different permutations and combinations of these elements create all the different other secondary elements, the substances which we see from that, objects. So these different permutations and combination is what is called Panchikaran. in a particular way. It's a process. It's a very technical term, which means how exactly a compound is created through these 5 elements, with the help of these 5 elements. So the concept is like this: 1/2 of any one of these elements combined with 1/8 of each of the other 4 elements. That is how you create a compound. This gross body, which we are wearing, is actually created like this. It is a combination of these Panchamahabhut and in this proportion. So this is called Panchikaran. 1/2 of one particular element combined with 1/8 of each of the other 4 elements. Now this, which element will be the dominant one, all this is again decided by our karma, our actual gunas and our karma. So that's why he says karma sanchitam in the verse, which means your karma decides the type of body you will have and the lifespan of that body, how long the body will remain, and what are the experiences that body will have. All this is determined by karma. So this is one of the most favorite theories of Hinduism. As you all know, the karma theory, one of the pillars of Hinduism. Little bit we will go into this theory, because to a great extent our karma decides a whole lot of things about this body and mind, not about your true being. That's why Vedanta in a way will dismiss karma. But this instrumentation which you are using, this body and mind, everything about that is determined to a great extent by your karma. So we will discuss karma for some time. What exactly is this theory about? See, karma is nothing but the effect of past actions. You can say the resultant of your past actions comes to you in a particular form. It descends upon the soul, as it were, in a particular form, and it is responsible for what you will experience in the present. This karma, it has 3 effects. Any work which we do, the resultant of our past action means what? Whatever action we have done in the past, it threw out some effects. These effects are usually classified as 3. One is, see, suppose you helped somebody with something. Suppose you helped your neighbor read Atmabodha, study Atmabodha. So that's a good act which you performed. And the positive effect of that act which is visible to you is that person was benefited by this study. So that's the physical effect, something, the visible effect you can say. But that's only one effect. The second effect is the motive and the goodness with which you taught Atmabodha to your neighbor. That created a deep sanskar or tendency in your mind. So this producing sanskar in the doer of the action is the second important effect of karma. Usually we don't think beyond the first effect, but these are all effects of karma. So it created in you a tendency to share, to care, to help others. It created a very positive impression in your mind, a very positive sanskar. And character is nothing but a bundle of sanskars. So if you want to build a great character, you just have to build your sanskars, create good sanskars through action. So this is the second effect of karma. The third effect of karma is something, again, invisible. You can't see it. It's called the cosmic effect or karmashaya. It means whatever action you perform, it lets off a cosmic residue effect, which means it comes back, the action, the force of the action will come back to you at some particular point of time when maybe you have forgotten that action, but its effect will come back to you with a force at some other time. It is called karmashaya. It is Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, a kind of cosmic reaction. If you have thrown out good, good will come back to you. If you have thrown out something evil, evil will come to you. Thus, in the same measure, maybe not in the same format, but forcefully the same thing will come back to you. Suppose you helped somebody today at some point of time, when you are in need of help, help will come to you. It will just descend on you. This is called karma shay, the third effect of karma. That is why what you sow, you reap. Today you sowed a good action, good will come to you. And if we are not careful with our actions, and actions include even our mental actions like thoughts, our will, our emotions, if we are not careful about them, we are generating all these three effects constantly. And they will come back to us. So please see, the first effect is plainly physical and visible. The second effect is, it is mental and psychological in the form of sanskar formation. The third effect is cosmic, and it is the exact effect of your karma. What you are sowing, that you are going to reap at some particular point of time, which you cannot say just now. So whatever we are calling karma is the result of these three effects. Whatever we experience in this body is the result of all these effects. And that is why we have three types of karma also, what are called, technically you see the names given are Sanchita, Prarabdha and Agami. This karma shaya, the net karma shaya of all your actions over so many births goes to form your Sanchita karma. Your actual stock of karma, you can say, the capital. And one bit of it is given for you to experience and exhaust in this particular life. One slice of that Sanchita karma, that is called the Prarabdha, like interest upon the capital, given to you to be exhausted in this life. So just now you are experiencing your Prarabdha karma. But these are not, karma is not an absolute law. In this very life, through your good actions, you can change your Prarabdha and Sanchita for the better. That is what is called Agami karma, which means what you do with in your day-to-day, everyday life. If you are performing good actions continuously, it will add on to your stock of Sanchita, and it will keep changing your Prarabdha also. So this is how you are the master of your destiny. The whole thing is in your hands. Vivekananda used to say that since your present is the result of your past action, what you do in the present is definitely going to determine your future actions. So you can do so much of good if you will rightly. You can do so much of good now. Your Agami karma can be so positive that you can change the very face of your Prarabdha and Sanchita karma. It is possible. And that is why you are in charge of your destiny. And don't leave it to somebody, because there's nobody else in charge of your destiny. Through our actions, we create our future. So the bottom line is this: do as much good as you can on an everyday basis. Go out of your way and bring benefit to others. If you maintain this tempo throughout your life, you don't have to worry about the future. There's no need for a future, because everything, only good will come to you. If on an everyday basis you are doing good, only good will come into your life. So the purpose of studying this karma theory and all these karma and the types, effects of karma is only this, to help you understand how should I function in this world. When I have come as an embodied being, I may be the Atman, but expressing itself through this body-mind complex. So the purpose of this body-mind complex is to contribute to this universe, to be able to contribute to all the beings around me. If I can do it in the measure possible, as much as I can do, definitely my future is assured. Through your Agami, you keep your destiny in your hands, as it were. So there is actually nothing called fate. Even if fate is there, it can be changed. See, the karma theory makes all this clear. That is why Vivekananda would say, you are the creators of your own destiny. Through your karma, you can change anything. You change all things that need changing. So here Shankaracharya is telling us, it is through your karma that you get this gross body. and these particular experiences in life. You see, he uses the word bhogayatanam. It is the seat of experience, the body and the mind. So this is created by your karma through the Panchikaran process and with the 5 subtle elements, the Pancha Mahabhutas. This is how the gross body is created. And next, he moves on to the subtle body. We have a lot of questions this time, so I will just go on for 2 more minutes and then I will switch to the questions. This subtle body, which he is going to describe now, Pancha Prana Mano Buddhi Dashendriya Samanvitam Apanchikrita Bhutotham Sukshmangam Bhoga Sadhanam. The subtle body, the instrument of the soul's experience, consists of the 5 pranas, the 10 organs, the manas and the buddhi, all formed from the rudimentary elements before their subdivision and combination with one another. The subtle body is what we usually call the mind. It is what goes with us when the body falls, isn't it? This is called the subtle body or Sukshma Sharir. But it is not just mind, it consists of all of these. See, he has given the list here. The 5 pranas, the 10 organs, which means 5 organs of perception, 5 organs of action. Their roots are in the subtle body. The manas and the buddhi. So a total of 17 elements are here, 17 parts. All of these constitute the subtle body. See, according to the Hindu view of death, with the fall of the body, the pranas, death is nothing but the snapping of pranamaya kosh, separating the annamaya kosh from the rest of you, separating the body from the mind. So technically, actually, Sukshma Sharir is called Pranamaya Kosh, Manomaya Kosh and Vijnanamaya Kosh. These 3 together combined is the Sukshma Sharir. Annamaya Kosh is the gross body. And beyond these 3, the causal body is what is called the Anandamaya Kosh. So these are technical concepts you just need to know, because he is going to tell us these are the constituents of the Sukshma Sharir, the subtle body, but this is also not you. But how is it created, how it works, that you should know. So it is also created from the Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 great elements, but in their uncompounded form, uncombined form, in their pure form. This is how it is created. What is created? The Sukshma Sharir. What does it constitute? The 5 pranas, which are Pran, Apan, Vyan, Udan, Saman. These are all the vital airs functioning in our body. Pran is that which makes breathing possible. Apan is the downward movement of our vital energy. Vyan is the all-pervasive vital energy in our system. Udan is the upward moving, ascending force of life energy. And Saman is that which brings about digestion of food, creation of blood. This is how it was seen, the Pancha Pranas. And then what are the 5 organs of perception? Our eyes, ears, nose, tongue and skin. These are the 5 organs of perception. The 5 organs of action are hands and feet, tongue, then the organ of evacuation and the organ of generation. These are the 5 organs of action. And included with these Pancha Pranas, 5 organs of perception and 5 organs of action are the manas and buddhi. Manas is mind, buddhi is the intellect. All these together form the Sukshma Sharir, which you are not, but through which you are functioning. And they are all created by the Pancha Mahabhut. That is the source material which creates all of this. So we will stop the class here for today and we will move to the causal body, which he is going to describe next in the next class, because that's the Karan Sharir, very important for us to know. And now we will take up the question answers. The Q&A, the questions are really very good this time, very interesting, very Vedantic. See, the first question is there a difference between Atman and Brahman? If yes, what is it? And if no, then why introduce self as Atman and not Brahman? So this is very rational, a very good question. If Brahman is the ultimate reality, reflected, you see, individual consciousness. How can consciousness ever be individual? This is how we define Atman. And the cosmic consciousness is Brahman. But how can consciousness have an individuality? So then, is there nothing called Atman? See, why do our scriptures give us the concept of Atman? Because presently we are identified with this body and mind to take us away from this. And because you are approaching reality through the mind, another entity called the Atman is posited, which is of the nature of pure consciousness. But if you dive into it, you will see that it has no borders and boundaries. Awareness, does it have borders? Tell me, can it have boundaries? So it is verily Brahman. But because you approach it from the standpoint of mind, by clearing your mind, you arrive at the fact of pure awareness. So the concept of Atman has come. That which is, that which always exists. Atman also, you see, the root for many of these words is as dhatu. That which permanently is, always is, never changing reality. That is only your awareness. But you are approaching it through the mind. Isn't it? See, how are we approaching Atmabodha? Through a study and through using your mind. So the meditative process also uses your mind. So when you approach it through one entity, so another transcendental entity is posited. But when you reach it, you will see it is nothing but Brahman. And that is why Vedanta is to be known through meditative awareness, through practice. It's not another thought construct. Not through mere thinking. When we dive into the meditative practice, you yourself will know what Atman means. The feel of pure awareness comes into you. So this is the way to, this is why there are two words, Atman and Brahman. It will be of interest to you that, when the Buddha was asked, is there an Atman? He kept quiet. And then the questioner said, oh, that means there's no Atman. And he kept quiet. So came up the philosophy of anatta, that there is no Atman, that means. That's Buddhism. So you cannot say what is there, but something is very much there. You have to discover it only through meditation. The meditative awareness will unravel the mystery of consciousness and not subtle thinking. So start a meditative practice and all this will become very clear to you. The second question is, if I is the self, the absolute truth, then who is that which is ignorant of this truth? What a beautiful question. So if I denotes the self, then who is the one who is ignorant? See, this is where you must distinguish between I, the pramata, and I, the sakshi. The real I is always the Atman, the eternal witness of everything that is going on in the mind. But the reflection of this Atman, pure awareness, falls in the buddhi. It falls in the buddhi, and that reflected awareness, you feel it as mental awareness. That is called pramata. That also styles itself as I. And that is called, the Atman anyway, by the way, does not style itself as I. It is just being, pure consciousness. But this pramata styles himself as I. So this pramata is different from, it is reflected awareness. It is different from the sakshi. And this is the one who is ignorant. The pramata is ignorant. He has yet to find the sakshi, but he is himself a reflection of the same. The reflection of the Atman in your buddhi is called the pramata. This pramata styles himself as I. And he is the one who is ignorant and seeking the knowledge of the Atman. So this is the answer to your question. The third is, what is the purpose of this physical body and mind when the real identity of mind is consciousness? The purpose of the physical body and mind is to make them fit instruments for reflecting the true divinity that you are. If the inner divinity is awakened, they will become fit instruments to express that divinity, to manifest that divinity. This is what Vivekananda defined. This is how he defined religion. Religion is the manifestation of the divinity already in man. So the purpose of these instruments is so that they are able to express the highest in you, the divinity within you. And with training, they will be able to do this. The training is usually of the mind. And because, there is this famous saying, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. The mind alone is the cause for bondage and liberation. And if the mind is trained and turned inward, it will take you to your source. So the purpose of this instrumentation is to manifest that divinity best. Then the next question is, ignorance is the problem and that it is the cause of our bondage and suffering. Hence, knowledge is the solution. But is this a belief? How to convince ourselves? What if we feel that the cause of our suffering is lack of surrender or lack of right action or lack of focus or lack of love? See, this is a very valid question. This is how most minds think. I don't understand what you mean by ignorance. This is only natural. This question comes up naturally when people tell me that ignorance is not my problem. My problem is restlessness. My problem is lack of peace of mind. I'm not able to surrender to God. I do not feel love for God. These are my problems. So this is right. See, the problem that Vedanta is speaking of, it is existential in nature. It is the problem of problems. But initially we have all of these problems in our mind. This is how, see, you are verily an embodied mind. What is happening in your mind, you can detect. The sense of peacelessness and restlessness that we feel. That is the natural way in which the mind is functioning. It's natural for you to experience this, I mean. So, once you detect this problem, first you must work at calming the mind. And as he puts the other things, bringing in more bhakti, devotion to God, developing a sense of surrender. These are all means. Once the mind is calm enough, pure enough, devoted enough, it will itself detect that fundamentally my restlessness was due to my separation from the source of my being. My lack of devotion was due to my identifying myself with something which I'm not. That is why I'm not able to connect with the Lord, because I'm identified as something else. So you are able to draw out the core problem as ignorance once we have developed all these very high abilities or qualities of mind: bhakti, devotion, surrender, focus, concentration, calm, peaceful state of mind. Basically, a very sattvic mind. If we develop this, then we will be able to track the core cause for all these problems. It is because I am separated from my source. My mind is not in touch with the reality of myself. And that is why it is throwing up so many problems. All our psychological problems are like this. So once the mind is brought to a certain level of clarity and understanding, purification, when once it is full of devotion for the highest, in Shankaracharya's works, he defines bhakti itself as complete dedication to the knowledge of Brahman. Love for the Lord means love of his real nature, isn't it? And so it is devotion to this supreme knowledge. This is how he defines bhakti. So all of the lack, the problems that we feel in our mind, at some point of time, we will come to the understanding the core causes our ignorance of our true being. So it is not a belief. Through existential analysis, you arrive at this. Then the I sense mostly appears identified with multiplicity. How can we isolate the I sense? You isolate the I sense by stopping your identifications. Once you remove the mind from the grip of its identities, it will stop and lead you to your real I. The next question is, by repeated practice, knowledge purifies the embodied soul stained by ignorance, and then itself disappears. What is to be repeatedly practiced? See, meditative awareness is to be repeatedly practiced. Not just inquiry, not just psychological inquiry. Meditative awareness. When you practice meditation, a deep awareness is just awakened within you. I told you, you remain perfectly conscious without the thought process. When this is deepened, you get a sense of your true being. If this is repeated, if this practice is repeated, you, as it were, enter your true being. So Vivekananda used to say this, that realization, it does not contradict reason. It is not illogical, but it is illogical. It is beyond logic. It is beyond your thought process. Raman Maharshi used to say, realization is inconsistent with thinking, with thoughts. It is not another thought, the Atman. It is to be known by developing the meditative awareness. Employ a process and enter into it. And you will become that. Here, knowing is being and becoming. There is no knowing the Atman. It is becoming the Atman. Then the last question. Atman is seer, knower, and not karta bhokta. Why is it considered spiritually elevating or spiritually elevated state when you are just a spectator and not a player? Is it not vegetative existence? Why moksha, where you do nothing, has higher spiritual status than service, like say Mother Teresa's? See, the point is this. First of all, this state of pure being is not a vegetative state. It is the state of the highest energy because it is full awareness. It is just the opposite of the vegetative state. And why this is held superior is for the simple reason, without touching this state, anything that you do may only cater to your ego. Even the good work, you can take pride in your tapasya even. Unless you touch this state, you don't become authentic. And isn't it natural for us to know who we truly are, the unchanging principle in us? That is why this state has been put on, it is considered the most elevating thing. And this is a question that naturally pops up in a very clear mind. Who am I truly first? Before I start helping the world, shouldn't I know who I am? And if you know who you are, you will help the world best. Because then you are a completely clear channel for the divine to work through you. So all this again has to be understood through meditative awareness and not merely through thinking. With this, I think time is up. Let us end today's session here and we will again continue next week. I will end with a small prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyanto Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhaga Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.